But I'm a Cheerleader is a 1999 swoony and hilarious romantic comedy set at a gay conversion camp. Directed by Jamie Babbitt and starring Natasha Lyonne, it's about Megan Bloomfield, who loves her family, her friends, and more than anything, being a cheerleader.
Okay, we're gonna kill the Rangers this year, right? Yeah!
One day, she comes home from school, and her friends, her boyfriend, and her parents have staged an intervention.
We're afraid you're being influenced by a way of thinking, an unnatural. Do you remember the woman on TV?
Honey, we think you're a lesbian.
Their evidence is 1, she doesn't really like kissing her boyfriend. 2, she is a vegetarian. And 3, she really likes Melissa Etheridge. Megan is shocked.
I'm not perverted. I get good grades. I go to church. I'm a cheerleader.
She can't be a lesbian. But her family and friends are undeterred and send her to True Directions, a gay conversion therapy home. RuPaul plays Mike, an ex-gay who will lead her deprogramming along with Mary Brown, played by Kathy Moriarty, who is the head of the conversion therapy home.
It's a long path to righteousness, Megan. And it's a battlefield of temptation out there, and you're going to have to fight.
Once at the conversion camp, Megan makes her first step toward becoming straight. There are 5 steps to go from gay to straight. Step 1 is that she admits that she is a lesbian.
I'm a homosexual!
Congratulations, Megan. You have just taken your first step in your true direction.
In the camp, she shares a room with several other young women who are engaging in practices like shocking themselves instead of masturbating to thoughts of women, or otherwise trying to train themselves into no longer being gay. Among her fellow inmates is Graham, played by Clea Duvall. Graham knows that she's gay and is there because her parents repeatedly are threatening to cut her off and kick her out if she doesn't straighten out. Graham hates Megan on sight. Megan is femme and seems to be buying into the possibility of converting.
This is bullshit, Megan. It doesn't work. You are who you are. The only trick is not getting caught.
Graham hates Megan until she loves her. The 2 girls fall in love while still functionally going through the ridiculous conversion process. While this movie is campy and funny, the threats to these kids are clear. Homelessness is a constant possibility.
Well, you can't come home. We can't allow you to live an unhealthy lifestyle under our roof.
2 boys get caught kissing at the camp, and one gets sent to a literal doghouse, and the other gets kicked out. But in this fantasy of a film, there's a gay couple, Larry and Lloyd, who are former inmates at the conversion camp and are there to take in kids when they get kicked out.
So you run like the underground homo railroad.
When Graham and Megan get caught having sex, it is Megan who steps into her gay identity and gets thrown out. She goes to stay with Larry and Lloyd, unsure what to do with her life. But Graham apologizes for having sex with a woman in order to stay at the conversion home. While at Larry and Lloyd's, Megan hatches a plan. She and the other kids who have been kicked out and are also living with Larry and Lloyd are going to attend the conversion graduation. And Megan, who loves to cheer,
Graham,
is gonna proclaim her love for Graham in the form of a cheer.
1, 2, 3, 4. I won't take no anymore. 5, 6, 7, 8. I want you to be my mate. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're the one that I adore. 5, 6, 7, 8. Don't run from me, 'cause this is fate.
Graham, dressed in pink, having finished all of the humiliating rituals of this camp, runs to Megan, and they escape into a precarious happily ever after. This film is highly stylized, retro in its aesthetic, and intentionally, regularly discordant. Are we in the 1950s, the 1990s, the Bible Belt, or a regular old suburb? It isn't clear, and that's on purpose. This movie is a romantic love story between two girls who are told that they are wrong. But the movie knows the truth, that the world doesn't deserve them. And there's a postscript. At the end of the movie, Megan's parents are attending a PFLAG meeting, parents and friends of lesbian and gays. And it turns out that they were the ones who needed to be converted all along. I'm Vanessa Zoltan.
I'm Hannah McGregor.
And this is Hot and Bothered.
Vanessa, I love this movie so much. I know we often start episodes like that, but gosh, I love this movie so much.
I do too. And I like a flash of seeing it when it came back to me. So should we start? What does this movie believe about love?
Yeah, okay. A lot. It believes a lot of things about love. One of the things that I think is really central is that it is thinking about how love is intertwined with desire, that like romantic love is entangled with sexual attraction. And that is really key because we see our protagonist right from the beginning being told that like it kind of doesn't matter if she experiences sexual attraction to men. Her job is to perform it. Her job is to slot herself into heteronormativity however she possibly can. And we don't see her experience like the entanglement of desire and romance until she begins to fall for Graham. And, you know, this is a coming of age romance. And so we get to see the way that sort of her burgeoning experience of being attracted to somebody is like really entangled with her first experience of loving somebody. And that is so married to the movie's commitment to like the realness and legitimacy of queer desire.
Yeah. In the beginning of the movie, our main character, Megan, is in a relationship with a straight guy. And the scenes of watching them make out where he's just like sucking on her tongue.
Just comes at her tongue first. It's horrifying.
And she's literally like eyes open and looking around like, what else can distract me from the tedium of this boy licking my tongue?
She's picturing cheerleaders.
Yeah, she is just picturing women. And then when you don't see exactly that she's picturing women, you can just imagine that she's like making her to-do list. Like, this is just so not what she wants to be doing.
Yeah.
And then with Graham, yeah, it's like so affectionate and exciting and like sparks flying, touching.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, slotting yourself into a relationship that you don't want, right, is like felt on a physical level.
Yes. Yes. 100%. And there's a very real sense that desire, that experience of desire can be the thing that makes you braver. That it is often the thing that sort of drives these kids to take risks, and that sort of intertwined desire and love becomes a source of significant internal strength. That it is falling in love with Graham that lets her like not only, you know, recognize her queerness, but like reject conversion therapy, reject the expectations of her parents, actually set out on her own, and then go back and fight for Graham. Like all of these things are made possible by loving her.
Yeah. And Graham loving Megan does the same thing, right? Graham's parents are like, we will cut you off without a dime if you do not renounce your homosexuality. And Graham really feels the pressure of that understandably.
Yep. Like, these are kids, right? Like,
The stakes are high.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the stakes are homelessness and not finishing your education.
and the movie, it's a comedy, and
Right.
it is mostly holding us away from having to spend too much time thinking about those stakes, because it's a queer comedy about conversion therapy, so it knows that has to walk lightly around some like really traumatic topics, but like it does let you see that seriousness and understand the seriousness of the decisions that these kids are making. I think in large part so that you don't judge the kids who don't make the choices that Megan and
Yes.
Graham make.
Exactly. And, Graham just stays longer at the conversion therapy sort of camp than Megan does. And Megan at first is really disappointed in Graham, but the stakes just get higher and higher. And so Graham's courage is more and more because she's inspired by this love and desire.
Yeah.
There is a moment in which Megan gets kicked out of the conversion therapy place, retreat center, and she has her suitcase and she literally is standing there and doesn't know where to go.
Yeah.
And I remember this as a comedy, and I'm sitting there and I agree with you that the tone of the movie, Megan is not panicking. She is not sobbing.
And we don't spend that much time there. Like, she has somewhere to
No.
go fairly quickly, but God, it's a devastating moment, isn't it?
Not remembering where she goes and that she remembers and figures it out. I was like, this kid has nowhere to go. Like, her whole future has just disappeared.
Yeah.
It is lightly touched, but devastating.
And it's, I think, really important for this movie that she does have somewhere to go, because the other thing I think this movie believes about love is that it not only can be a seed for personal liberation, but is at the root of collective liberation. That she goes to stay with this queer couple who are also from True Directions, the conversion camp. They are also, XX gays, I believe is what they refer to themselves as. And they take in the kids that leave that camp. Like, they live nearby so that they can take in those kids. And like, as soon as she's there, she becomes part of a community. And I think that's really key, that it's like, queerness is not just a thing. Queer love is not just a thing that leads you to lose your stability and the conventional world you lived in, but also brings you into another kind of community.
Or at least is an invitation into another kind of community, right? Yeah.
What about you? What do you think this movie believes about love?
I think that this movie believes that there's a desire from the outside world, right? From Megan's parents, from Megan's friends, to make her feel ashamed of being gay. But once she is in her relationship with Graham, and this explicitly gets stated, right? There's no judgment inside romantic love. Graham, when she first meets Megan, is super judgmental that Megan is a cheerleader. And then she loves Megan and understands that it's a form of self-expression, right? Like, love is understanding, love is paying attention, love is getting to know someone. And so once you are in love, like, that shame and judgment goes away. And therefore, being in love allows you to be your more authentic self, your most authentic self.
Yeah.
Because it's where you are known, and therefore where you are like not asked to feel shame.
Yeah. The movie is really interested in conformity and in queerness as the opposite of conformity. And I think it's really important that when we see these different characters sort of falling in love and figuring out who they are within romantic relationships, that they don't all turn into the same other kind of thing, right? That it's not like they switch from being, she switches from being a cheerleader to being something else. Like, she actually just is allowed to be fully herself with all of the contradictions inherent in that were a problem in her heterosexual world, where people are like, you can't be a cheerleader and also a lesbian. And then initially Graham is, before they are falling in love, Graham's pushing her in the opposite direction. Like, you can't be a lesbian and a cheerleader. Like, these things are incompatible. And it's really crucial that actually they are compatible. That actually, like, once they are in this relationship together, neither of them have to change who they are. They can show up as their whole messy, weird, non-conforming selves. Melissa Etheridge posters and vegetarianism included.
The other thing that this movie thinks about love, and this is, similar to what you were saying, that it just can open up your worldview. We see this in our lives, right? You are in a romantic relationship with someone from a different culture, and because you love that person, you almost feel a pride in that culture, right? You're like, well, my wife is Brazilian, and it's like it makes you feel just a teeny bit Brazilian. And there is something to that here, right? That it can really increase your worldview, being in an intimate relationship with someone.
Yeah, and particularly, I think part of what is so powerful about that aspect of romantic love in this movie, as with a lot of the other coming-of-age romances we've watched, is that this sort of first intense love is often a major thing that opens up the world for young people. And we've seen that happen in all kinds of ways, around like your first love and your relationship to your sport, or your first love and your relationship to class and the possibilities of your future. Like, it's played out in different ways in different high school romances. And this one is like your first love, which is simultaneously like blowing up your entire understanding of what you thought the world could be. And that's like one of the things I think makes this such a good love story, is that it is both deeply and specifically queer, and also, I think, gets at something that feels intensely true about young love, which is it blows up your whole world, or it can.
One of the things that I think is interesting in the movie is how much Graham and Megan are like constantly calling each other in to queerness again, right? Like, Megan arrives at True Directions and Megan is like, my family just had an intervention and told me I'm gay and I'm not gay. And Graham is like, you super are. You're super gay, right? And then at the end of the movie, when Graham has decided to stay at True Directions and Megan has left, and Megan, we'll talk more about this next week. And I love the ending of this movie. And it's another calling in, right? Mm-hmm. It's not judging. It's like, excuse me, I want to remind you who you are. You're gay, right? They're constantly sort of reminding each other who they are.
Yeah. And that comes in lots of sort of small pushes, right? For example, a scene that I think is really pivotal is when the kids all go out to the gay bar, the cocksucker.
Yeah.
It's a really crucial experience for Megan and Graham. It's where they kiss for the first time. But it begins, like so many of these scenes, with one of them kind of talking the other into being a bit braver than they want to be. Graham's like really sort of not aggressive, just like really encouraging her to come out, and at the last minute she agrees. And it's a dynamic that I think you're right, it's important that it keeps flipping, and that a lot of the forms of courage that Graham, facilitates in Megan are often outward forms of courage, doing a thing that she wouldn't normally be comfortable doing, and a lot of the forms of courage that Megan encourages in Graham are more emotional forms of courage, right? So not pushing Megan away when things get scary, right? It's not just one of them luring the other. It's like deeply mutual.
And I think that is obviously one of the things that makes this movie so good. I feel like a lesser version of this movie is one in which Graham is like teaching Megan how to be gay.
Yeah.
And instead they're teaching each other how to love.
Yeah, because the movie, for all of its interest in trope and stereotype and painting with a broad visual brush in particular, it's very committed to the belief that there is not one way to be gay.
Should we talk about subtext?
I mean, there's not a ton of subtext in this movie. Do you want to start? Did you find any?
Well, I think that, and maybe this is only subtext insofar as it's not the main argument of the movie, but I think it is an argument that the movie is making. And it is very much something that we are talking about these days, which is that people who are obsessed with heterosexuality are freaky weird. So the executive director of True Directions, at the end of the movie, like, she has been working toward this final ritual in which she is teaching people how to have heterosexual sex. And she has them in full body unitards with leaves, Adam and Eve style, over their genitalia and breasts, and is watching them hump each other through these costumes and instructing them on how to hump each other better through these costumes.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this movie knows that people who are obsessed with other people's sex lives are flippin' weird. And I feel like that just got articulated in the culture like a few months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be something that maybe mainstream culture is catching up with. I think it's something that queer people have been pointing out as a response to accusations of grooming for a long time. And this ongoing sense that exposing children to queerness is sexualizing them, but indoctrinating children into straightness is neutral and natural. And so Mary is this like really sort of outsized version of the aggressive indoctrination of children into heterosexuality via her like insistence on watching them perform sex with each other to ensure that they are being adequately straight. And it is, you know, like, I certainly see the connections between that and somebody saying that their 2-year-old is a little heartbreaker.
Yeah. Oh,
I mean, this, what you're pointing out sort of ties into the thing that I was interested in when thinking about subtext in this movie, because I did, you know, go back and read a little bit about its original reception, and people really didn't get what it was doing. Like, they profoundly did not get that it is, I mean, as we have discussed previously, this is a movie that is very engaged with the aesthetics of camp. It is extremely inspired by the work of John Waters. It's very interested in an over-the-top queer aesthetic that involves like aggressively color coding things. And, you know, the whole aesthetic of True Directions is about this like really over-the-top version of heterosexuality where all of the girls dress in pink and all of the boys dress in blue, and the boys are outside learning how to play football and chop wood, and the girls are inside learning how to vacuum and change diapers. And that stylized dimension of the film extends to the, you know, the construction of particular scenes. Like, it's really interested in symmetry. It's really interested in like playing with foreground and background. There's this really creepy scene where Megan has a phone call from her parents after bedtime, and it's shot so that she's like right up close in the foreground, like holding the phone, and then hovering over her shoulder is Mary in bed with like curlers in her hair, strumming an acoustic guitar. And it's so sinister. And she's not physically in the same space, she's in the next room, but the camera shot is so like intensely angled and so carefully constructed. You know, when Megan, before she arrives at True Directions, everybody in the straight world dresses in brown. Everything is brown. Everybody dresses in brown. It is a world of overwhelming brownness.
and beiges.
I mean, I would argue that beige is a subset of brown.
Just, it goes all the way from chocolate brown to beige.
And then she gets to, you know, she finds Dolph, one of the other kids who has already been kicked out. When she goes to stay with the queer couple, Dolph is there. And Dolph is wearing full rainbow pajamas. So the movie is very winky. It is very camp. It is being very silly with what it is doing visually. And critics at the time truly did not get it. They were like, this movie is cliched and unrealistic and over the top.
True.
Like, these were the criticisms that it received. And it has now become this cult classic. It is widely understood to be a classic of queer film. People really appreciate and understand the deliberateness of what it is doing with the set dressing, with the costuming, with the hair design, all of this stuff, right? It is deliberate that Graham always looks a little wet. Like everything this movie's doing visually, it's doing on purpose. And it's interesting because I don't think of any of that stuff as subtext.
Right.
It seems so obvious to me. And it's really interesting to be like, oh yeah, at the time, it's edgy to the point of illegibility for a lot of the viewers when it first came out.
I mean, can we pick one of those things, though? Like, what do you get as a media studies professor? How do you read the fact that Graham is always a little bit wet?
So Graham is there to be visually and physically challenging to all of our ideas of femininity. And there are other women on screen who are doing that as well. I would argue that Jan is the other really important challenge. And I think Jan is also a really important character because she's the one who visually reads as very butch and then has a revelation where she's like, actually, I'm straight. I'm just
straight.
not pretty. So that is also key. But Graham is there to be as physically discomfiting as a sign of femininity to both the viewer and to Megan's very sort of straight trained gaze as possible. So she's a little dirty. She's always sort of skulking a little. When we first see her, she's like squished in between two people and kind of like bent at a weird angle. Like her body is like slightly alien all the time. And it's important that like when she is going out to the club, her hair is even greasier.
Right. That is her authentic self.
Graham's authentic self is a little wet. Yeah. The movie's obsession with latex, I also find really, really fascinating because it suggests at once, you know, it's a nod to kink culture, it's a nod to queer leather subcultures, but it is also has a lot to do with Mary's repulsion at human bodies and the possibility of real dirt, right?
Yeah.
So we see Mary, for example, at one point, her garden is plastic flowers that she cleans with Windex. She is like often wiping down their plastic beds, like everything is covered in plastic. And I think it's important to remember that like this movie came out very shortly after the height of the AIDS crisis. And the anxiety about queer people being unclean, carrying disease, things that we have touched needing to be wiped down, on the surface is like, Mary, what a kook. And then underneath the surface has a really dark history to it.
Yeah. And this movie is saying not just Mary, what a kook, like Mary, what a flipping control freak, what an oppressor, right? Like, again, whether or not that truly qualifies as subtext, right? It's played for laughs. It's played for like, oh, okay, lady, you're Windexing your garden. But under that is not just that darkness, but also that brokenness, right? Mary is broken.
Yes, yes. I think one of the really key things that lets this stay a comedy is that Mary fails.
Yes.
I mean, conversion therapy doesn't work. So all conversion therapy fails because you can't do that. But the way in which Mary fails is comically over the top, right? She can't even get people to stop acting gay.
Right.
These kids just get gayer under her watch.
Yes, they do.
Because she keeps dressing them in blue mesh and making them get under cars together with RuPaul. Like, you know, the fact that she is constantly having these fights with her son, who is the most sort of stereotypically gay of all the stereotypically gay characters we see on screen. Part of what lets this be a comedy is how fully straight culture is losing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that, like, if any other school failed this many students, it would be shut down as ineffective.
Yeah.
She's so bad at this.
She sure is.
What do you think we're learning about our theme of queer love?
Oh, man. Okay, so first and foremost for me is that this movie shows us that queer love is world making, that it transforms the reality of the world around you. So it isn't just like the world stays the same and you're a little happier in it. It's queer love remakes the world in a different image and opens up different possibilities that are not just there for the couple in question, but are there for everybody who their love touches. So, for example, we got the stark difference between everything else we've seen in the movie and the home of this queer couple who rescues kids from True Directions. That, like, what we witness in their home is a total departure from the kind of visual continuity the rest of the film has had going, right? That there's this sort of monotony everywhere else. And then this is like, there's still a lot of visual jokes in their home. Like, for example, at one point, Dolph is setting the table and all of the dinner napkins have huge AIDS ribbons sewn onto them.
Yep.
Like, there's a lot of really good, this is what a queer household looks like jokes. But also what you see is like the first example of loving communication between partners, the first example of children being told that however they are is totally fine and that they can find themselves in whatever way they want without any coercion being imposed upon them. The first example of people being able to dress however they want. I mean, Dolph is wearing rainbow pajamas, but nobody's made him do it, so he must have chosen them. But there's no longer a dress code, so there's this sense of a sort of breaking out or liberation into a world of more infinite possibilities. Like, for example, I think it's really important, spoiler, that the actual last scene of the movie is Megan's parents at a PFLAG meeting. That, like, we get this very clear sense that queer love doesn't just expand the world of the queers who are in love with each other. It expands the worlds of anybody else who loves them. The reality itself and the incredibly narrow version of reality that heteronormativity offers people gets expanded and blown open by queer love in a way that offers the possibility of remaking the world into something that is more liberating for everyone, queer or not.
Except for the people who will shut out their queer loved ones, right? So acceptance will open up the world.
I think love. Like, I think that's
Yes.
really key, right? Like, acceptance is still on the sort of negative end of the spectrum.
Oh my God, right? Like with tolerance.
Exactly. And that it's been so clear throughout that, like, Megan's dad really loves her and that she really loves her parents.
Yes, absolutely. They call because they miss her so much,
Yeah.
right? Like sending her to conversion camp is hard for them.
Yeah. They're doing it because everybody is telling them that this is the loving thing to do for their child.
Absolutely.
You know, and because, like, it is genuinely dangerous to be queer and was a lot more dangerous at the time that this movie was made than it is now. And it's still very dangerous now. They're not the first parents to be like, we will try to save you from your life being harder than we want it to be. And it's very clear in that ending that Megan's queerness is going to expand the world for them as well. And that's what queerness does, is that it expands the world into something bigger and more capacious and more full of love than the world that the movie begins in.
Yeah. One of the small things that I think this movie talks about in terms of queerness, I'm only bringing up here. It is not the thing I want to focus on, but I want to bring it up here as a way to remind myself to trace this through the 5 movies that we're going to look at, which is, what is the sort of barometer by which this movie thinks queerness is dangerous?
Yeah.
And, you know, Graham, by loving Megan, a trust fund is taken from her, right?
Yeah.
There are actual real repercussions and they are financial. And you get the sense, right? Like it's over the top wealth that's being taken from her, but it's her parents, right? Like, it is a safe place to live with people who she already knows, right? Like, there is going to be the safe place for her to go. But these are strangers who she's moving in with, the XX gays.
Larry and Lloyd,
who that fight between the two of them, between Larry and Lloyd, where they are like disagreeing about the ways to love these children and like the best ways to set up these kids for success is just, I feel like we see so few productive fights between romantic couples in film because that doesn't often like move the story forward, right? It's not like true conflict. And it was just so beautiful to see this like productive, loving fight between two characters on screen.
It's so funny because it's both obviously a joke by the queer filmmakers about how queer couples fight, while also being like, hey, it's funny and it's also better.
Yeah, we know it's funny and like overly listening and I hear you, but man, it's so lovely.
Yeah, it really is.
But yeah, I've mentioned it already, and this could have just been how it impacted me. But that moment in which Megan has sort of all of her worldly belongings. And again, it's played for laughs, right? She's been kicked out of True Directions and she has her suitcases and her pom-poms, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's visually still like light.
Yeah.
And yet her parents have explicitly said, you can't come home gay.
Yeah.
Like, you know that you cannot come back home unless you are straight.
Yep.
And she is standing there with nothing but her pom-poms, right? Like a couple pairs of underwear, a couple skirts, and her pom-poms, and nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just interested in tracing that, the way that these films represent that.
Yeah, and part of that's going to be, as I'm sure you know, is the shifting political and legal landscape against which these films are happening, right? That we're in the early 90s at this point. Gay marriage is illegal. Again, we're like very shortly out of the height of the AIDS crisis, and like queer kids are often rendered homeless. So like the stakes are real. The danger is real. Again, it's a comedy, so it like moves lightly around these dangers, but it doesn't hide them because it is a central component of what queer love means, is that you are loving people against the pressure of your family, your friends, your school, your church, your society as a whole, the legal system, that like everything is stacked against the possibility of queer people finding love and building community. And that is part of the power of queer love.
Graham has a great monologue almost exactly at the halfway point in the movie where she says to Megan, we're not actually here to be converted. That's not a thing. We are here to be taught how to pass, how to act straight so that we can pretend for the straight people.
So we don't make them uncomfortable.
We're still gonna be gay.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things I love about this movie is how ridiculous the straight people are made to look, right? This is actually a training ground, exactly like you said. This is how we can get trained to not make them uncomfortable.
Yes.
It's not actually about being converted.
Yes. And the thing that we are training them to do is so absurd. Like, it's so on the face absurd and unnatural. And that's another really key part of all of those aesthetics of plastic and latex and costumes and weirdly symmetrical film shots, right? That like it's unnatural.
Oh, they have a girl electrocuting herself every time she has an impure thought.
I love Siobhan. She loves pain and she is a lesbian.
Yeah, and it queers the idea of the electrocuting herself because she likes it.
Because she really likes it because it's how she masturbates.
Yeah.
Okay. I've been saying the word heteronormativity a lot, and I think maybe I need to define it a little bit. So I'm just going to hit the emergency stop button real quick.
Whoop.
So, heteronormativity. It's a concept created by queer theorists, specifically by Michael Warner and Lauren Berlant. And the essay where they sort of define it at the greatest length is called Sex in Public. And in that essay, they define heteronormativity as, quote, the institutions, structures of understanding, and practical orientations that make heterosexuality seem not only coherent, that is, organized as a sexuality, but also privileged, end quote. So what's really key about the way that Berlant and Warner are thinking about heteronormativity is that it extends significantly beyond opposite sex attraction to the construction of the world as a whole. So we see that in a ton of ways throughout this movie. Heterosexuality and heteronormativity extend into ideas like marriage is a relationship between a man and a woman that exists for the sake of reproduction. Women's jobs are to be at home, in the house, managing the domestic sphere, having children. Men's jobs are to go out into the world and be the breadwinners. Girls open their mouths to receive and men put their tongues in there. The norms are deep and profound. But heteronormativity also expands beyond the kind of institutions that we see in this movie into things like medical systems, for example, right? The sort of legal force of heteronormativity is such that queer families often struggle to gain access to a family member who's in the hospital because they don't show up as family in the legal ways that the hospital is used to understanding. That like wills can be really hard for queer people to write because the legal system is built around both the naturalization and the privileging of heterosexuality. But really key to heteronormativity as a sort of way of structuring the world is that it doesn't only insist on the naturalness of sexual relationships between men and women, but must, in order to render that natural, also do a lot of coercive work on creating categories called man and woman. And those categories needing to be stable, to be linked to biology and to the possibility of biological reproduction. They need to be like reinforced at every stage. They're so profoundly unnatural. Like this idea that like people neatly slot into one of two categories, the end, is so profoundly unnatural that it needs to be coercively constructed from the second a person is born throughout their infancy, childhood, high school, right? That institutions and social practices are indoctrinating us into narrow conceptions of gender identity from really early on as a preparation for heteronormativity and for everybody then getting slotted into heteronormativity. And Judith Butler is the theorist who sort of most famously articulated the artificial nature of how we are taught to perform gender. That's in their iconic book, Gender Trouble, in which they say that gender is acted out, that it is performative rather than being innate and biological, and that the performance of gender as a binary reinforces the quote-unquote truth of biological sex, which in turn reinforces heteronormativity. And so a big part of, Butler's really, really interested in drag and other art forms that emphasize the performativity of gender by emphasizing it as a performance, right? So deliberate, self-conscious performances of genderedness become a queer act of resistance to the sort of compulsory nature of heterosexuality and the sort of gender performances that fit into heterosexuality, which is, why camp is queer, right? Because camp is about performing gender, but putting it in scare quotes of being like, yeah, I'm a woman, sure. So queerness also blasts open gender norms because gender norms and heteronormativity are so profoundly intertwined. which is why it is so crucial in this movie that Jan is straight, because she is the girl at True Directions who is most visually failing to conform to the gender norms that they are attempting to impose. Like, Megan, classic femme, can pass for straight with no difficulty. They have high hopes for her because she's a femme, and because femmes often pass for straight, whether we want to or not. Femmes often have to go to a lot of work to make people read us as gay. Because they're just like, lipstick, I see. A straight person. God damn it. How many tattoos do I need to get here, people? But that, Jan is there to, in part, remind us that a rejection of heteronormativity also means a rejection of gender norms, and that is collectively and universally liberating to straight and queer people alike, because it means that Jan can be like, I love softball. I love my kind of mohawk haircut, right? She's got this like strip of buzzed hair down the middle and then like totally shaved sides. Like, she likes all of those things. And also, she loves balls, she announces proudly at one therapy session. Like, and that possibility, right? She's been told that there's something wrong with her, that she is also not fitting into heteronormativity, not because she's not attracted to men, but because she's not performing her gender correctly. And so we see the way that queerness sort of breaks open all of those structures.
I have a friend who had ovarian cancer when she was 15, and so had to have a radical hysterectomy at 15. And she is straight, but because of the discourse around straightness, in part being about procreation, she really got invested in a queer identity, right? Because she was like, my body is not rendered useful in heteronormative spaces. And so she was like, no, I have a queer body, and not through a choice of my own, but she found a tremendous amount of power from that. And she was like, this is ridiculous, the way that you all talk about heteronormativity. Like, how many things you need in order to be heterosexual, according to your definition, renders so many people outside of this that one could argue it doesn't exist.
It's almost like it doesn't exist. Or rather, like, it is profoundly artificial and needs to be profoundly externally reinforced. It's always a dead giveaway that something is artificial, is when everybody has to fight so dang hard to reinforce what is apparently a natural structure.
Yeah. Hannah, you should watch this movie if
you like color coding things. Like, if you're one of those people who really likes to like arrange your books on your bookshelf in like color, according to color instead of title, this is a movie for you.
Absolutely.
Vanessa, you should watch this movie if
you like cheerleading, but you're okay not watching a ton of cheerleading. I feel like I was like, I love dancing and cheerleading, and then I was like, oh, I get some. Not enough.
Not a ton.
It scratched the itch, but it wasn't like a massage.
Yeah. It's a soup song of cheerleading.
Exactly. Next week, Hannah, we are going to be looking closely at the ending of this movie. I am so excited.
Because that's where we get the cheerleading.
That's where we get some cheerleading. There aren't like pyramids, though. I like group cheerleading.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So the topic to discuss today with an expert was obvious to us. Gay conversion camps are real, and we wanted to understand more about them. Luckily, we are actually kind of family friends with someone who wrote a book on this topic. So we are going to talk to Dr. Lynne Gerber. Lynne is the author of Seeking the Straight and Narrow, Weight Loss and Sexual Reorientation in Evangelical America, and is the host of the fabulous upcoming podcast When We All Get to Heaven, produced by Ariana Nettleman, which you can subscribe to right now. Let's get Lynne on the phone. Hi, Lynne.
Hello, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this today. So you wrote a book comparing ex-gay ministries and Christian weight loss programs. What made you want to do that? Where were you seeing those conceptual similarities?
Well, I mean, it came from two different directions. One was I was deep into this social theorist named Pierre Bourdieu, this French guy, and I was reading all of his work. And part of what he was really interested in was the body and how to really facilitate something like a transformation in consciousness, like consciousness raising. It's not just a question of sitting around talking in a room with people and raising their consciousness. He was suggesting there should be some kind of bodily training to accompany that, to really inscribe the way that social systems have gotten patterned into our humanness via the body. And I was just reading that and isn't that interesting? Then I was thinking, well, and I had only stereotypical knowledge of the ex-gay movement at the time. I had just seen the one documentary that anyone had seen at that point. And I was like, well, isn't that kind of what they're doing? They're kind of trying to do this, we're going to retrain the body into making people straight. Is this a counterexample? Is it a good example? Is it not a good example? I don't know. But that was the theoretical interest. And then I'm a fat person. I've had fat politics a long time. I'm interested in body size and the moral charge around fatness and body size and the charge around it that has a religious overtone or a religious connection. And a friend and mentor of mine, Marie Griffith, had just put out a book called Born Again Bodies about the body and American Protestantism. And it had this whole chapter on Christian weight loss, which I had known nothing about. And I was like, well, this is an interesting potential comparison because here are two projects about bodies and desires that are intensely morally charged, that a lot of people think need to be changed. There's also a lot of evidence that change does not happen easily, and it certainly doesn't come the way that the model tells us. It's not a calories in, calories out situation, and it's not a, if I'm more gender conforming, my sexual orientation will shift. It's not the theory, but folks go week after week and month after month and year after year in a religious context where they think things at least potentially can miraculously change like that. So wouldn't that be an interesting comparison? So that's why I wrote a book about it, because I thought it would be interesting.
That's a great reason to write a book. What did you learn from both of them? It does sound like it was an interesting comparison that you had going in. Was there something you learned about one that taught you about the other, I guess?
One thing I learned is that a person could be the head of a weight loss ministry for more than a decade and keep coming back with book after book about how, in fact, she has gained weight over the time. This was a person who was never particularly fat. But you can continually over the years write that you keep gaining weight on your weight loss program and still keep your job, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
And very soon after I finished the book, I was studying a group called Exodus International, and Exodus International decided to close in part because people in leadership were realizing that change was not happening, that their claims were not factual for a lot of the people involved in it, and that caused a transformation in that organization. So it's an interesting comparison about thinking about what the intended results are and whether or not the lack of achieving those results matter and how they matter. And not achieving them allows for the conversation to be sustained, or the fellowship, quote unquote, or the connection, or the thing that is valuable to people that makes them want to keep going. It allows it to keep going if it's a problem that's never solved.
Yeah.
It was very interesting to me that it's one thing for quote unquote ex-gay people to say, look, hey, my sexual desires are persevered. That is a true fact, and I need to rethink some of my choices based on that. Versus how much harder it is to say, look, I'm a fat person, or I'm not even a fat person. I'm at a weight that's different than what I think, and I wish to not fight that fight forever because it seems like a war that can't be won. And maybe being a little kinder to my body is something I could consider. And I mean, one thing that happens in diet culture, of course, is that diet culture is very good at absorbing some measure of, oh, but you can love your body. Oh, but you can accept. Okay, you don't have to lose 700 pounds. You just can lose 7 and that would be great. And then you're like, well, you just keep moving those goalposts, you know? There's just a lot of interesting contrasting possibilities about what the lack of success on its stated terms mean in terms of the discourse in the community and how they get sustained or how they change.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So, But I'm a Cheerleader came out in 1999, and you were doing your research on Exodus International in the period directly following. And Exodus International was the nation's largest voice advocating for changing sexual orientation. How would you characterize the organization?
So the world of conversion therapy, like if that's the biggest umbrella, or the world of therapeutic/religious efforts to change one's sexual orientation, is a wide world with a lot of different kinds of practices and a lot of different kinds of practitioners. Some super religious, like, I don't know, casting out demons, like super religious. Some of them are super therapeutic. You're going to go to a counselor. You're going to do biofeedback. You're going to do some of these techniques that people who may not identify as religious might recognize, and a whole lot of things in between. It's like a huge world. Exodus was a very particular point and a very interesting point in that world, in part because it was an organization that was founded by people who at the time identified as, I don't know, I can't remember exactly the language, but, you know, people struggling with same-sex attractions. So it's people who were oriented erotically toward people of their same gender, but they didn't want to call themselves gay because that was already a step in the I'm losing this fight direction. So they tried to take a step backwards and develop a language that acknowledged the direction of their desire. But it was founded by people who were actually what I would call gay people, and which many of them, after a couple of years in Exodus, would also call themselves gay people, which meant that they were not closeted. They were not, or they were a lot less closeted than the kind of person who tries to change their sexual orientation by bringing zero attention to the fact of their erotic orientation. These folks were like, no, I am an ex-gay person, which means they had to talk about it. They had to identify that way. For some people, that was a relief because they were frankly so gender nonconforming or so erotically nonconforming that, you know, there's no place to hide, right? So you might as well say it. But it was a different kind of conversation. And as a result, it was kind of marginal for many of its first decades or two. And then the Christian right developed, and it developed its tools, and it developed its money, and it's developed its organization. And it realized that Exodus would make a very interesting partner, that a place like Focus on the Family might have a lot more legitimacy in its anti-gay stuff if it was making pals with the ex-gays who are trying all that they can do to not be gay anymore and developing their own language and critique of this, that in partnership with resources and money and a lot of anti-gay hatred, that Exodus was a potentially really strong legitimizing partner. So at around the time that But I'm a Cheerleader came out, Exodus and places like Focus on the Family and leaders in the ex-gay movement, people who visibly identified as ex-gay, were involved in very public campaigns about the possibility of change because they were countering this argument made in other sort of pro-LGBTQ positions that I was born that way. This is a change that can't be changed. This is a fixed part of my nature. It doesn't need to be changed. It doesn't want to be changed. And they were trying to promote a counter message that, like, yes, change is possible. So like Exodus leaders and Focus on the Family and all these other Christian right groups had done a very public advertising campaign, like full page ads in like the New York Times and stuff. I think it was called the Love One Out campaign. And then Focus on the Family and Exodus partnered to do these conferences called Love One Out conferences, which is where my fieldwork started, was at a Love One Out conference, which was a conference for ex-gays, but more so for their families, friends, for all the places to go and all the people to go. Because one of the other things that Focus on the Family realized is that the people they had to address were not just people who were erotically oriented toward people of their same sex or gender, but that those people were starting conversations with their friends and their family and their pastors and their youth pastors and their siblings and their cousins. And they're saying, why is this so bad? Look, my partner's great. You love her. Like, this is all fine. Focus on the Family wanted to capture those people to say, like, yeah, you think it's fine, but it's not fine. Come here to Love One Out, and we will figure out a way for you to both not have to tell your gay kid they can never come to Thanksgiving again, but to hold on to your traditional values. And so what in the Exodus context was very much specifically for people, quote unquote, struggling with same-sex attraction, unquote, became in partnership with something like Focus, like a larger organizing campaign for a wider range of people who are being challenged by gay rights and gay rights movements and gay liberation, and not wanting to lose those people from the fold, which is a very different context than something that's like a camp that's represented in a movie like But I'm a Cheerleader,
Why did Exodus International end, and how?
So the founder of Exodus International was a guy named Mike Bussey, and I think that he is like an unsung hero of our time. He founded Exodus, I want to say it was in 1974, something like that. And then the context of being the director of Exodus, he fell in love with another guy in Exodus, and they eventually left. They were the subject of this documentary. Well, he has like devoted his life to being in dialogue with Exodus and former ex-gay people to really formally challenge what Exodus was doing and to really call them to account for truth-telling about what was and what wasn't happening. And what was happening in the period before Exodus closed is that a lot of people were really claiming the harms that were done to them through programs like Exodus and other ex-gay movements. And people like Mike Bussey, who were a little older, a little further along, were like organizing these dialogue sessions that were like, no, really, you have to listen to us. We were your former members. Like, this was harmful. This was extremely harmful, and you need to be held into account. truth mattered then in a certain kind of a way, you know, this is a different moment, but it did, like, truth verifiable in reality was still something that places like the Christian right in Exodus and places were holding themselves to, again, in a way that I think is actually different now. But it was true then. And it became overwhelmingly obvious. Like, some leaders announced that they maintained their same-sex attractions, quote unquote, but they were staying in their marital relationships with their heterosexual partner. And they developed this category called like a mixed orientation marriage, which is an interesting solution to that problem. I mean, they were finding out interesting, queer, complicated things to do in their intimate relationships, but not the kind of things that a focus on the family has the room for, right?
Right.
That is beyond that. So they basically shut down because they knew the gig was up, that it was more complex, that they didn't think it was right, and that real harm was being done, and that people like Mike Bussey made leaders like Alan Chambers listen to that. Pray Away is a documentary that talks about some of these ex-gay leaders and the sort of path to changing their perspective that includes some of the Exodus leaders. It's a good documentary about that. Yeah.
One of my favorite things about conversion therapy camps, though, is how much gay sex happens at them. I'm like, you've just locked a bunch of gay people in a room together.
Well, but here's the thing. This is my opinion. Not everyone will share it, but based on my research, one of the things that was most interesting to me is like the sex doesn't matter as much. The only person that I ever met who got kicked out of an ex-gay ministry, and he was in a residential one like that, and he was young. He was like maybe 20. He never had sex. He fell in love with somebody else, and he started to question the project. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that he fell in love, and it wasn't that he had sex. It was that he was like, maybe this isn't a sin. And they were like, you got 24 hours, pack your bags and get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
Like, sex you can repent from, and you can get a lot of mileage out of repentance, because part of it is the sex, and then part of it is the circle the next day where you confess, and part of it is the repentance, and that all can be used to the good according to the ex-gay ministry.
Right.
Like, it all can be fodder for that. The thing that can't be fodder is maybe God doesn't hate this. Maybe this is actually fine. Maybe it's even a blessing. Blowjobs, we can handle blowjobs. We cannot handle maybe you're fine, and you could do better things with your time and money than spending it with us.
Oh my God. Yep. Okay. Well, this was bleak. Thank you, Lynne.
I hope this was helpful.
It was
very delightful to watch that movie again. Yeah.
It was so helpful to talk to you. Always delightful to talk to you. And just like, what a brilliant concept to compare ex-gay ministries and Christian weight loss programs. Like, that's just a really brilliant idea.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being interested. It's a book I read a long time ago. It's delightful to know that anybody still finds it interesting. So thank you.
You've been listening to Hot and Bothered. We are a small show and really appreciate your support, which you can show for us at patreon.com/hotandbotheredrompod. If you love the show, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We're a Not Sorry production. I'm the executive producer, along with the beautiful and brilliant Ariana Nettleman, who also edits and produces the show. We are distributed by Acast, and we love to thank our soulmate level patrons: Elizabeth Schweinsberg, whose heart we would play a game of one-on-one basketball for; Lauren Byer O'Connell, who we would call up on stage to dance with in front of the whole summer camp; Avi Lichtenstein, who we would make every person in the kingdom try on a shoe for; Kristen Hall, who we would travel through a time portal to spend the 19th century with; Shiri Yadlin, who we would write a sonnet about and read it in front of the whole class; Delia Rose, who we are majorly, totally, butt crazy in love with; and Leia Goldberg, who we would carry on our backs as we jump from tree to tree like a little spider monkey. We also love our team: Julia Argy, Nikki Zoltan, AJ Aramas, Courtney Brown, Anissa Ahmed, Danny Langley, and Stephanie Paulsell.